Dendroctonus ponderosae hopkins, otherwise known as the mountain pine beetle, is part of the family of bark beetle insects. Under a centimeter in length, it normally resides in the pine forest ecosystem, living under the bark of pine, lodgepole, ponderosa, and western white pine. Usually their presence is a positive one. They help forests by speeding up the process of development of a younger forest by killing old and weakened trees. But lately, over the past few years, because of the unnaturally warm winters in British Columbia due to global warming, the beetles have had the opportunity to destroy not only the weaker trees, but also the healthy and mature lodgepole pine trees. This has proved to be a huge disaster for BC's economy and ecological system. The water quality in the area has vastly decreased, wildlife habitat has been changed, the landscape's aesthetics have been defaced, the potential for forest fires has more than doubled, and the value of the property of the landowners is steadily falling. The billion-dollar lumber industry that British Columbia has been so famous for is facing a sudden change in their once prosperous and booming economy. There are three main causes for the current outbreak of the pine beetles. The first is the favorable weather that they have been having for the recent years. The winters have been milder and milder each year, killing off less and less of the bugs, allowing them to thrive under the bark of the trees, making new habitats wherever they please. This is where they lay their eggs and breed their young, relying on the water and nutrient supply in the trees that keep them alive. By doing this, they create a blue stain kind of fungus that devalues and discolors the wood. But fortunately, if the infested trees are harvested within 3 years, then the final product still has almost the full economic value without being infested. The second cause is a lack of control of the situation when the outbreak first started years ago. The fault is shared by two guilty parties, the government and the people. The government is to blame for not helping out financially, and the people for not mentioning it earlier and taking action when the beetles had not yet emerged as an extremely dangerous power. The third reason that has helped this natural disaster evolve and metamorph into a huge infestation that it is today is the fact that BC's landscape is one that is ripe with the perfect trees that pine beetles love to eat. These trees are weak, susceptible to such unexpected attacks.
Every day, every hour, every minute, our world is changing. Sea levels are rising because of melting glaciers, droughts and forest fires are greatly affecting landscape because of the lack of precipitation, and global temperatures are on the rise. Is this simply a result of nature's natural cycle? No, we are to blame. The billions of citizens of the Earth are diminishing the world's freshwater supply, cutting down trees from the ever-disappearing forests, and burning fossil fuels, which release many polluting gases into the atmosphere. There are many factors influencing the climate changes that have come upon us, but the main influence is the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. When these gases, which are ridden with toxic material, are released into the atmosphere, their toxins linger there for an extended period of time. When the sun naturally heats the Earth, its rays penetrate the atmosphere and then escape. Though heat gets locked in and it cannot escape this violently thick cloud of toxin. This is called the greenhouse effect because it can be compared to the warming cycle of a greenhouse. Carbon dioxide, or methane gas, is very toxic. As temperatures are rising, so are the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Usually, it is the job of plants and trees to breathe in the carbon dioxide and breathe out the oxygen, which is what humans need to inhale to survive. However, the amount of carbon dioxide emitted exceeds the Earth's capacity to absorb it, creating a thicker greenhouse, rising temperatures, and longer seasons of warmth in northern climates. As outlined in the introduction, this means that the pine beetles of British Columbia will not die off at the start of winter. If they survive through colder periods that their environment is not accustomed to, they will continue to proliferate and kill forests. If these trees are eliminated from their ecosystem, it will result in diminished forest, which in turn will reduce the amount of carbon dioxide being recycled by the trees to create oxygen for humans and other animals to breathe.
Tree by tree, and bush by bush, the forests of BC are slowly but surely succumbing without a fight to the voracious appetites of the destructive pine beetles. The infestation of so many trees is causing a huge economic setback for not only the province itself, but also the country. Because of this, not only the revenues of the BC government will be hit, but the jobs related to the industry and the people who hold them will be even more severely affected. Lumberjacks, construction companies, builders, pulp and paper factories, newsprints, and many more. Nature's balance is extremely delicate, sensitive to the slightest change in temperature, the amount of carcinogens and toxins emitted into the atmosphere. As proven, the headlines from recent years broadcast the numerous natural disasters that ravage the lands on a global scale, the diseases plaguing our population, and the thousands of deaths caused by some new unknown weapon. The Earth screams out. This is her cry for help. This is her revenge, nature's wrath. The beetle infestation in BC is only one example of the great Mother Nature's fury. This is only one example how insects can propagate in general, because of climate change. In the Montreal area, there is a risk of the spread of Lyme disease through the widely known and feared leech called the tick.
If you live in Canada, you know the temperature difference between British Columbia and Montreal. For instance, it's much colder in Quebec as it is in British Columbia. But if temperature continue to rise, and if the temperatures also in Montreal also rise to a level those pests can survive also in Montreal in winter, that can certainly bring the same consequences that you observe already in British Columbia.
Right. Ticks are known to be a species that are everywhere, ranging from the southern to the northern continent. They are blood-sucking parasites that feed on both reptilians and mammals. One of the main transmitters of diseases to both humans and animals, they are responsible for spreading diseases such as Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia, relapsing fever, and most importantly, for Canadians, the Lyme disease. Naturally, ticks infest the forests of BC as they would in any other area. Most are carrying Lyme disease, which is a big danger to anybody or anything who contracts it, for transmission is quite easy. The symptoms include a circular-shaped rash, resembling a bullseye that continues to expand after a delay of treatment after 3 to 30 days. Feelings of migraines and fevers, which can later lead to meningitis, fatigue, chills, and aching joints are included. If the disease isn't treated properly, or after a bout of 6 months, arthritis and the loss of muscle tone, also called Bell's palsy, can be experienced. The infected ticks from BC can possibly travel across Canada to Quebec's trees and animals, infecting and causing a huge epidemic for all Canadians alike.
And as the weather warms up, there's a chance they can move. So now if you look into Alberta, for example, I think there's a movement of the beetle through the Alberta. And the particular species of pine, which is in BC or the Alberta, is a lodgepole pine. A very closely related pine is the jack pine. So jack pine is very common in Quebec or in eastern Canada, and they can potentially infect. In fact, I think they do infect jack pine, but may not be that much. There's a potential.
This is just an example of what could happen on a national level. But imagine, on a
the
global
infestation
scale,
of pine beetles in
how
British
much
Columbia
damage could
has
happen.
become a natural threat of enormous size. In times like these, the worst that can be done is to not act and let it grow larger and larger until it is impossible to control. In wake of these events, the Environmental Council of British Columbia has released a guide informing citizens on how to combat this infestation. The brochure outlines what the government has done so far to prevent the infestation, and subsequently, what can be done every day to aid in this fight against the infestations of pine beetles. To quote the guide, "It is impossible for human intervention to halt the beetle epidemic in its tracks at this stage in the infestation. Until the epidemic ends, British Columbians must work together to slow and contain the spread of the infestation and lessen the associated threats to the province's economic well-being." The actions taken by the government include, in 2001, creating a caucus which immediately addressed the issue and worked to develop a plan of action, logging more than 22 million cubic meters of forest, which will reduce the beetle's consumption, and investing more than $100 million into their endeavors over the past 3 years for research. It is essential that there is a rapid response to the infestation, because it has been projected that by 2012, 70% of some forested areas of British Columbia will have been killed by the mountain pine beetle.
Yeah, let's say, for example, for us, I think we have to think about more into how do we control this sort of, I would say, if you take pine beetle, for example, how do we control? I mean, there are natural ways of doing it, there are semi-natural ways of doing it, then also there are artificial ways of doing it. I would say natural is, like maintaining the balance, ecosystem balance, following the natural cycles as much as possible. That way we don't have to use artificial chemicals. And the other possibility is we can use natural system, semi-natural way. For example, the pine beetles, they do have chemicals called pheromones. The insects usually communicate through these chemicals, which can act very, very small quantities. Those chemicals could be used for attracting or repelling. So we can use that sort of chemicals to either attract these beetles to, let's say, one place and then control them, or repel them. In fact, they're using that sort of chemicals to biologically control. And the last resort is obviously using artificial pesticides, but I think we should minimize that sort of artificial pesticide and try to go semi-natural or natural ways of addressing major environmental issues, particularly on the forest.
Though the British Columbian government has outlined tactics to combat the imposing threat of the spread of beetles, everyday citizens must actively contribute to solving the problem. Steps include detection of the beetles, the debarking and then removal of the trees through either burning trees, burying them until flight season ends, or even submerging the trees underwater if it is environmentally possible. Also, spraying trees with registered insecticides, including 7, in June and late October can be effective. If beetles ingest the sprayed bark, they will die. There are also various other instructed methods on how to diminish the size of an infestation, and if there are any other further inquiries, the most suitable thing to do would be contact local district offices. This is not only an infestation that is affecting the forests of British Columbia. The mountain pine beetle has also plagued the forests of Washington, Oregon, and several other northwestern states in the USA. Oregon has set laws regulating the size of pine trees, which will help reduce the widespread infestation. Interestingly enough, the infestation of pine beetles is not a new occurrence in Oregon, as they ravaged the trees of Crater Lake National Park in the late 1920s and 1930s. Groups in Washington, including Washington State University, are encouraging people to plant species of trees that are adapted to the area on which they are planted, to prevent trees from becoming overmature and being harvested on time, and to diversify the species of trees planted. The American government has pledged money to help combat the mountain pine beetle at both state and national levels. Evidently, this is an international problem. Overall, this is a very large issue to deal with. The fact that both the government and citizens ignored it for a considerable amount of time makes it even worse. Although this infestation has grown to large proportions, if the proper actions are taken, it is possible to eventually restore normality within the area. It is all up to the determination and care taken to combat the pine beetle infestation and climatic change in general.